Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 reminds Spock he's not the best Vulcan. The recently released clip from Star Trek Strange New Worlds' upcoming third season shows LT Spock, Ethan Peck, being reminded yet again that he is not the perfect Vulcan. With a Vulcan father and a human mother, Spock has struggled to reconcile his two identities throughout his Star Trek journey. By the time of Star Trek, the original series, Spock, Leonard Nimoy, has chosen to fully embrace his Vulcan side and strives to be the perfect Vulcan. However, as his story progresses throughout the Star Trek films, Spock comes to accept and even celebrate his more human tendencies. As seen in the above clip, Spock will continue to confront his insecurities about only being half Vulcan in Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3. Strange New Worlds has already been exploring this element of Spock, particularly in his romances with his Vulcan fiancée T'Pring, Gia Sandhu, and the very human nurse Christine Chapel, Jess Bush. While Spock's current romantic status remains somewhat complicated, he made the choice to embrace logic in the Strange New Worlds musical episode. But when Captain Christopher Pike, Anson Mount, and the Enterprise crew members are turned into full-blooded Vulcans, Spock must confront his own perceived inadequacy. How Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 reminds Spock he's not the best Vulcan. When Spock is directly confronted with his friends as perfect Vulcans, it brings his own status as a half-Vulcan into sharp relief. In the clip above, Captain Pike, Nurse Chapel, Lin Noonien Singh, Christina Chong, and Ensign Nyota Uhura, Celia Rose Gooding, all become full-blooded Vulcans. Spock then accompanies them on an away mission, which they complete in record time. Based on the short clip, it appears as though Spock ends up being basically superfluous on the mission, as his Vulcan friends perform even more efficiently. Spock's logical Vulcan mind often comes in useful, but he finds he doesn't have much to do on a Federation landing party full of Vulcans. Spock is clearly annoyed at being called out for being less Vulcan than his friends, a fact that they continuously remind him of. When it appears as though Pike, Chapel, Lin, and Uhura will be stuck as Vulcans, Spock looks very unnerved by the prospect. While it's unclear why Pike and his crew members were turned into Vulcans, they will surely be returned to normal by the end of the episode. Still, this experience will likely continue to affect Spock moving forward. Spock deals with being half Vulcan his entire Star Trek life. As soon as Star Trek, the original series, established Spock as being half Vulcan and half human, this became a defining trait of his personality. Because he chose to join Starfleet rather than attend the Vulcan Science Academy, Spock remains estranged from his Vulcan father, Sarek, Mark Leonard, James Frain, for years, which certainly didn't help his struggle to feel Vulcan enough. Spock's human mother, Amanda, Jane Wyatt, Mia Kirshner, encouraged him to be himself, but he continued to resist his most human emotions and impulses for much of his life. Sometime after TOS, Spock began the Vulcan ritual of Kolinar to purge his remaining emotions, but the process was interrupted thanks to the arrival of V'ger in Star Trek, the motion picture. Over the course of the Star Trek feature films, Spock learned to accept both his Vulcan and human sides, finally realizing that he is far more than the sum of his parts. In Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Spock is still at the very beginning of this lifelong journey and will continue to confront his feelings of insecurity for years to come. Since its debut, Star Trek Strange New Worlds has skillfully walked a fine line between honoring the legacy of the original series while adding fresh narratives and deeper character development. Among its many highlights, one of the most intriguing aspects of the series is its portrayal of Spock, a character immortalized by Leonard Nimoy and redefined by Ethan Peck in this new iteration. In Season 3, Spock's internal struggles with his Vulcan and human sides come to a head, reminding us that despite his brilliance, Spock is not the best Vulcan, and that, in fact, might be one of his greatest strengths. Spock's eternal identity struggle. The character of Spock has always been defined by his hybrid nature. As the child of a human mother, Amanda Grayson, and a Vulcan father, Sarek, Spock constantly grapples with the duality of his heritage. While he strives to adhere to Vulcan ideals of logic, emotional suppression, and discipline, his human side tugs at him, presenting him with emotional dilemmas that traditional Vulcans would dismiss. Season 3 of Strange New Worlds continues to explore this internal conflict, but with a unique twist this time. Spock's standing among Vulcans themselves is questioned, revealing that even though he may be a stellar Starfleet officer, he's not necessarily the best Vulcan in the eyes of his own people. This realization hits Spock harder than he may have expected. For much of his life, he has endeavored to suppress his emotions and live up to the rigorous standards of Vulcan culture. But Season 3 shows that his efforts may never be quite enough. Encounters with other Vulcans, Spock's journey in Strange New Worlds, Season 3 is intensified by his interactions with other Vulcans who embody the ideals of their species more completely. These encounters serve as a mirror for Spock, reflecting his perceived shortcomings in his quest for logic and emotional control. Whether through subtle dialogue or overt confrontation, these other Vulcans remind Spock that he can never fully escape his human half. This clash is not just about individual disagreements, but about Spock's position within the larger Vulcan society. In one particularly poignant episode, Spock faces a Vulcan colleague who epitomizes everything Spock has tried to be logical, detached, and free from emotional influence. This character, whose Vulcan serenity seems unshakable, highlights Spock's internal struggle, exposing the gaps in his adherence to Vulcan ideals. While Spock is an incredibly competent officer and intellectual force, the episode emphasizes that these strengths do not automatically make him the perfect Vulcan. Instead, they reveal his inherent divergence from what traditional Vulcans consider the pinnacle of their cultural identity. The beauty of imperfection, what makes Season 3 of Strange New Worlds particularly fascinating, is how it embraces Spock's imperfections rather than positioning them as something he needs to overcome. The series takes a step back to show that Spock's inability to fully embody Vulcan ideals is not a failure, but a testament to the richness of his dual heritage. His human emotions, while often sources of inner turmoil, grant him a depth of empathy and emotional insight that pure Vulcans may lack. Throughout Season 3, Spock's relationships, especially with his human crew members, underscore the benefits of his human side. His friendships with Captain Pike and Nurse Chapel, for instance, thrive not in spite of his emotional struggles, but because of them. Spock's emotional accessibility allows him to connect with these characters on a deeper level, offering comfort and wisdom in moments of crisis. In a key episode, Spock faces a dire ethical dilemma that a purely logical Vulcan might solve with clinical detachment. However, it's Spock's willingness to listen to his human instincts, to feel and to care, that ultimately leads to a solution that benefits everyone. Here, Season 3 makes it clear that Spock's complexity, his imperfections as a Vulcan, are what make him an extraordinary Starfleet officer. Spock's journey towards self-acceptance. By the end of Season 3, the tension between Spock's two halves is far from resolved, but there is a sense that Spock is beginning to embrace this duality rather than resist it. The season arc allows Spock to question whether the goal should ever have been to be the best Vulcan. Instead, the narrative pushes him towards self-acceptance, realizing that his value lies in the balance he maintains between his Vulcan and human sides, not in choosing one over the other. Spock's story is not one of perfect logic, but one of growth and acceptance. Season 3 of Strange New Worlds doesn't shy away from reminding Spock that he may never be the quintessential Vulcan. However, the series brilliantly reframes this as a strength rather than a flaw. In a universe filled with challenges that require more than just logic, Spock's humanity is the key to his greatness. In reminding Spock that he's not the best Vulcan, Strange New Worlds Season 3 brings out the best in the character: his empathy, his complexity, and his ability to forge connections across divides. Spock may not be the ultimate Vulcan, but he is something more, a bridge between worlds.